Hello, everyone. Good evening to our UK attendees and good afternoon to those tuning in from the US. My name is James Swanson. I'm here representing both the club as well as the Harlequins Foundation. It has been a big week for us, which I know Nick will mention very shortly. But I just wanted to say thank you for joining us tonight for what is the first of many panel discussions tackling equality, diversity, and inclusion and the landscape within sports. So lastly, thank you to Nick Heath for moderating this series, and also to our panelists for giving up their time this evening and for sharing their stories. And Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much, James. And yes, a very good evening to you all. Hello and welcome. Thanks for spending your Wednesday evening with us. We will be here for about an hour. And yeah, it's wonderful to be here. I hope you're all feeling sane, fit and well. If you're managing at least two of those, then I think you're doing wonderfully. As you will know, we're here under the auspices of the Harlequins Foundation, as James mentions, to whom I'm honoured to be an ambassador, having been approached last summer, and also tonight is in conjunction with the club as well. To introduce myself, I'm a journalist and broadcaster working in rugby. I'm a proud member of the Sports LGBT network. I'm an RFU diversity role model, which I was last year. I've even got my own LGBTQ plus Pride in Touch initiative in the sport, which I play to international level. If I could play anything to international level, then you can as well. It was a year ago on Monday just gone that Harlequins hosted the very first Pride match in professional rugby. And so here we are in LGBT History Month once again. To commemorate that and continue the conversation we started in a panel before that match, the title of that one, which was Why Should Rugby Care About LGBTQ plus Inclusion? As you've hopefully seen, our question today is how can rugby improve its support of the LGBTQ community, plus community, and why does it matter? So to help answer and discuss the key topics around such a question are the Chief Financial Officer at the RFU, a former England captain and triple Grand Slam winner. It's Sue Day, everybody. Sue Day, yes, very good. You have to applaud yourselves on this. And we have Major League Rugby's first out current player joining us from across the pond, former New England Free Jacks flanker. It's Devin Ibanez. Woo!
Thanks for having me, guys.
I think his hairstyle's winning the evening. Then we have Harlequins number 8 and the first Scottish player to be awarded a full-time contract now with over 40 caps to her name. It's Jade Konkel, everybody. Very good. Excellent. Going for Gold Wave. And club chairman of the oldest gay and inclusive rugby team, the King's Cross Steelers, a member of the RFU D&I implementation group, and lover of a flat white. It's Mr. Matt Webb.
Hi, everyone.
So welcome all. I'm actually going to just do a nice thing and check in with each of you before we get into the full chat. A few seconds, a minute of your choosing, whatever you fancy. How are you? How's 2021 treating you? Matt, I'll come to you first.
Well, you know, it's off to a rocky start for us all. Waiting for the announcements to get back to some rugby and some running around. The sort of the prop weight is gaining again, which is good. We need them for our front row. So apart from that, you know, we're getting on as best we can and trying to stay active and part of a community. So
very good. Jade, how about you? How are you getting on?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. If you see rouge in my cheeks, it's because I've just finished the session. I'm currently in isolation, so I'm smashing out the home sessions.
Ah, I see. Very
nice to break up the evening.
Yeah, okay. Well, we hope you're doing all right in isolation. Devin?
I've been doing really well. It's been a very crazy year so far. For those who don't know, I very recently came out as the first openly gay MLR player. That was right before the new year. So the last month has been, you know, overwhelming and amazing to see the positive response. So I'm really excited to see what the rest of the year holds.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll certainly come on to a bit of that and hear more about that and how that's been for you. And an evening to Sue as well.
Evening, Nick. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. You know, it's challenging times for rugby and getting rugby played, and so I've certainly got my hands full back at base. But being entertained, actually some rugby going on, you know, some international rugby going on at the moment. So enjoying that and making the most of it. And like Jade, I've just done a training session, probably not quite as taxing as the one she just did.
And I thought the rouging was just the Van Rouge on the go.
I definitely get a lot more purple these days than I used to.
Very good. Well, lovely to hear from all of you. Before we continue as well, I thought it is just worth touching on the fact that, you know, a word perhaps on our representation here. We're conscious that we are covering the L and the G of the BTQ+. There is no direct B and T representation, not for want of trying, I should say, but suffice to say that with some further initiatives coming down the line from Harlequins and the Foundation, there are plans for this to become part of future conversations. But, you know, between us, we can certainly touch on some of the issues as we go, I'm sure, but more on that in a bit. Guys, I know we're all getting used to Zooms and how these kind of things work. It is a conversation. It's not all going to be led by me. So if someone's saying something and you've got a quick thing you want to say, just do that for me. And we can, either that person can spot you and give way like we're in the House of Commons or whatever. So let's make sure we are visually addressing each other. So in terms of the question at hand this evening, for all of you who've tuned into the webinar, I hope you've got a glass of something nice and cold with you to enjoy the next little conversation. How can rugby improve its support of the LGBTQ+ community, and why does it matter? Well, it being LGBT History Month, I thought I'd just take a very quick look at where we've come from to sort of contextualize perhaps what improvements can be made from here. You can look back to somewhere like 1995 when the King's Cross Steelers were established. Lord Robert Hayward was one of those on our panel last year who was one of the co-founders. The year 2000, International Gay Rugby and Board was established. We've seen many clubs across the world join IGRAB, who are now simply IGR. 2007, looking more at some of the personalities in and around the game. Nigel Owens came out in the same year that he made his refereeing debut in the Six Nations and Rugby World Cup. A couple of years later, we heard from Gareth Thomas, who came out, the former Welsh and British and Irish Lions legendary winger. Then sort of looking at perhaps how society addresses certain issues. The RFU, through Ian Ritchie, the CEO at the time, decided that they would ban 2 fans in 2014 who would verbally abused Nigel Owens from the stands. So that was a governing body really started to take action on those kinds of issues around language. A few years later, and only a few years ago, in 2019, gosh, remember that, when the world was lovely, the RFU were marching at Pride, which I expect may have just been Sue caught drinking on the street and again being caught up in a parade. Maybe it was more formally arranged than that. We can touch on that. And then last year, King's Cross Steelers celebrating 25 years, and of course the inaugural Harlequins Pride match. And this year, well, 29th of December, as Devin says, a currently playing player coming out in Major League Rugby. And this week we have the announcement of the Harlequins LGBTQ+ supporters group. And there are some founder members within that supporters group. The group will be allowed to develop its own name and identity. But once again, Harlequins really leading the way on that. And we hear there are also plans for another Pride match to come later in the year. So plenty to be happy about, reasons to be cheerful with progress, improved tolerance, acceptance, groundbreaking initiatives at the elite end. Albeit largely led by James, who we heard from a minute ago in Harlequins. But perhaps approaching the question through the second part, I think, in terms of why does it matter? I guess, why do we need more out of sport in terms of support for the LGBTQ+ community? And Matt, maybe I can come to you first, where the community game is I guess, the best and closest reflection of society. It touches a little on what we discussed a year ago, but why does LGBTQ+ support from rugby matter?
Thanks very much. I mean, I think, yeah, it's a huge topic, but there's some fundamentals in there for me. We have all seen in this last year a sort of key shift in terms of inclusion, in terms of how we all view what we thought inclusivity meant and how we are inclusive, through sort of the Black Lives Matter protests and through, you know, aspects of sort of Maggie Alfonsi being sort of, you know, getting abuse from her recent sort of commentating roles. So I think the aim to be kind and to be inclusive and welcoming is something that everybody is taking more to heart, I hope. And I think there are always going to be the Twitter trolls. I think for our game and for us, there are still people out there who get abuse when they are on the pitch, and if they still hear it, they still see it. There is an aspect of culture that needs to be changed in terms of rugby, and I think the more visibility we have, the better. I think we saw it in our club, where we did a survey. 68% of our members had heard homophobic language through a season, which was quite shocking, quite frankly, because we thought that sort of had gone, and that was 25 years ago. But realistically, when you do the surveys, and Monash University did a good piece on this, they found that actually 98% of the people in those clubs just thought that somebody would feel very, very welcome in their club as a gay person. They didn't, join up the dots of how language was impacting them, and then what it actually meant for the people. And in a time where we need as many people playing rugby as possible and getting back to the sport after a pandemic, I think all rugby clubs need to look at being more welcome and opening as well.
And I think you sort of mentioned to me before we started, experiences of people who may be coming to an inclusive club because of the values you hold at the Steelers, compared to perhaps how some of rugby's, I don't know, for want of a better phrase, the average community game out there is holding itself. Yeah,
I mean, Jeremy Schmitz is a name check from one of our players. He's a straight player, had very much fallen out of love with the sport. Didn't like the sort of toxic masculinity that was in the game, and in that club that he was at, and felt it wasn't the right place for him. And so, somebody that is a good player, a great player, and lost to the game, but through contacts came down, had to go playing rugby with us. And felt it was a different vibe. And, we're by no means perfect, and we have a long way to go in terms of improving in ourselves, and something we've been looking at this year during lockdowns. But I think it's really important that we continuously aim to be as welcoming as possible to everybody, so that, they feel at home in the sport, and that they see themselves being able to play the sport again. But yeah, I think, that language piece, especially for someone, and he's a teacher, he couldn't sit himself alongside the sort of language and the culture where he's there trying to teach children at school. That's not the way to be. No, understood. And it also kind of reminds us of the fact that inclusion isn't a euphemism merely for LGBTQ plus people. It's actually for people to feel that they're included in a club or a sport where the values match the sort of environment they want to be in. So inclusive in that sense. Jade, I wanted to come to you. I was listening to Gemma Whitcomb, who's a senior lecturer in psychology at Loughborough University. The De Montfort University did a thing earlier this week about how the LGBTQ plus community suffers with mental health. And she was referencing more directly the trans community with suffering more greatly with anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide, interpersonal problems, these sorts of things that we know affect the community as a whole. For our trans friends, I think these issues are related to discrimination due to living in a world where gender is so binary, these kinds of things. But on a broader note, inclusion does have a strong role to play here, doesn't it? What has inclusion meant to you, and how do you think it might be improved?
Yeah, I think it's so important for there to be a positive portrayal in the media, and for everybody to see that no matter what, you will be included. And that just gives a bit more confidence. And, you constantly hear in women's rugby, especially, can't see what you can't be. And I think that, covers all walks of life. That's, including the LGBTQ plus community, for those, kids at home that might be struggling to come out, to be able to see people, in your favorite sports team be out and be happy and be out and comfortable. I think that's really important to see that there is an inclusion there. And especially for those people coming through. And you touched on the trans community, and I've watched this amazing documentary on Netflix called Disclosure. Now, if you haven't seen it, you have to watch it. It is absolutely incredible, and it just paints the exact picture on how the media plays this huge role in inclusivity. And I just think it's so important to see that. And again, in women's rugby, it could be slightly more stereotyped from they must be like this and that. But again, I think it's important to then portray that that's not always the case, and everyone's open and free in their own kind of way.
Yeah, it's interesting, Sue, isn't it? I think we've come through rugby at a point where I don't know, because society's attitudes seem to not be as bothered by finding out about gay women in sport, but we see the silhouettes on the fronts of the newspapers about, are we going to find a Premier League footballer, and the sort of witch hunt nature of things. Yet there've been, gay women playing sport, gay relationships within teams for a number of years that don't seem to suffer the same attention. But actually, maybe now with women's sport and women's rugby becoming ever more known and getting a greater platform, quite rightly, there's actually an opportunity for the women's game and the visibility within it to take a lead in that area.
So there's a huge opportunity here. There are so many positive stories out in women's sport. So, when Kate and Helen Richardson Walsh were both at the Olympics and got married, and the positive story that hockey managed to create out of that. So they're saying to the world, look at this inclusive sport that we are. It's really incumbent on us as sports to take those positive stories and turn them into something special. I thought it was really notable that you talked about the story of the history of LGBT in rugby, and that didn't have any out female internationals in it because nobody knew it existed. Rugby existed. I played international rugby in 1997 and I was out, and I wasn't the first one, but nobody knew it existed at all. It's back to Jade's point, that role modelling is critical. So little kids sitting at home can see there's someone like me, there's a place that I belong, and we all know how hard it is to come out, and we all know how difficult it is to wrestle with all of that. And we've all heard those, but back at, I had a conversation at work and was talking about, this is decades ago, I'm showing how old I am, and derogatory comments about Martina Navratilova, and that sent me back into the closet, literally for years. And if we, sport, can be the vessel for showing kids it's okay to be who they are, that is just so powerful.
Yeah, I was listening to Abby Burton speaking on the Seventh Heaven pod, and I think that there was a clip of that went viral in the last couple of weeks, and actually, she's talking about the couples that are within the team and saying actually how the couple have made a particular effort for it to not be a problem in the squad, but actually almost to be something that's celebrated, and that the club love having them as a couple within the squad, and there isn't a secret negativity that needs to be told to the papers about it. And I just think I wonder what you think about us needing to hear more from same-sex couples who might be playing sport.
I mean, I personally, I really think we need to hear those stories, just for the reason I just said. It's so important for those little kids to be able to hear the stories. At the same time, of course, it has to be when people are ready to tell those stories and feel that it's the right environment to tell those stories. And that's why you see in men's sport far fewer of those stories, because the way that people are brought up, what society tells them they have to be, all of those stereotypes, all that pressure does mean it's much more difficult. And so the more, coming back to your question, why is it important? The more we can create that inclusive environment where it feels okay, the more those people will eventually feel like it's all right to be who they really are.
Yeah, well, it sort of leads us quite nicely to Devin. You've got your hand up. I mean, I'm coming to you now, really. I think we've been used to athletes and people sort of coming out, particularly when I go back to the male side of it, and perhaps saying, yes, I'm a gay man, but then it's almost as if a lot of the previous personalities in years gone by have gone, I'm going to just leave that information with you, and I'll go back to living my life as a gay man in a way that you won't have to worry about. And I think what's been quite impressive about your last few weeks, and certainly since you've come out, you're not just a current rugby player, but you're presenting your relationship, you're presenting Fergus and your holiday albums to the world. I mean, has that been a conscious choice to be more than factual? I'm a gay player, I'm out, but I'll go back behind closed doors where you might need me to be, society, or to be like, and look how in love we are.
No, it's absolutely an intentional decision. And I think that what you were discussing about there being so few people who feel comfortable expressing it in that way, I spent so much of my life trying to fade into the backdrop, right? To not bring extra attention to myself because of a fear that it would bring this personal detail about myself to the forefront. So now that I'm out and I have this opportunity to use this platform to show that you can be openly gay and proud in this sport and that there's a place for you, I think it's extremely important to take the time to do that. And going back to the original question of why is it even important? I think that in sport and as athletes, we have an additional responsibility to really undo years of trauma that the LGBTQ community has towards sports. So many people felt like they never could even be included in sports, or that it couldn't even be an option for them because, as Sue mentioned, so much of the signaling you get, especially, from my perspective as a male athlete, is you cannot be a tough person, you cannot be a good athlete and also be gay, right? There's this idea that you're a lesser athlete if you're gay, you're not as strong, you're not as tough as the other people. So I think that it's really important to make a strong effort to counteract that and say that no, sport is actually a space where you can be a strong and proud gay person, and there is a place for you here. So I think that that's why I feel like it's so important for me to go above and beyond in a way to really express that rugby, despite its reputation of being a very masculine or an intense sport, that doesn't mean that it's mutually exclusive for players who are gay and feel like they might not be welcome in that kind of a space.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And how have you found, therefore, the last few weeks? I mean, or rather a step before that, sort of how have teammates of yours responded over time, or more recently, perhaps, how with it being more public?
The recent response has been incredible. I mean, my teammates across the board have been extremely supportive, but I think it goes back a bit to what Matt was talking about, where it's, you have people who will express support for you and who are very, happy to pat you on the back after you come out, but did their actions before you came out line up with that notion, right? It's great now that I've come out and I've gotten that support, but were those people who were giving me positive feedback and positive impressions about their views towards the gay community while I was still in the closet? Because for me, when you're struggling with coming out and being open, you're always looking for those cues, right? You're looking for a signal that your teammates are going to accept you or that they're going to have backlash against you. So I don't think that players take it as seriously being proactive as they do to, go and actually congratulate you after the fact.
Yeah, well, you'd rather, if they're going to be coming for you, it's because of the playlist you've put on the team bus, not because of who you're going home to bed to that evening. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, I think we need to keep, as many young girls and boys in sport as possible. We're seeing the decline in team sports across, a number of sports, but rugby specifically, and we need to keep people in the sport. And for that, they need to feel comfortable and confident. They don't want to be walking through the bar after a game and hearing sort of the old guy in a blazer sitting at the end of the bar, using derogatory terms that make them feel unwelcome, and make them feel that they can't be their authentic selves. I think I experienced that. It took rugby in my 35th year for me to feel confident enough to come out to my parents and my brother and sister. It wasn't until I joined the Steelers and found a community of people, and where rugby was what brought us together, and that was the most important thing, that you felt, well, I am okay and I can be my sort of authentic self. So I think that journey and making people feel, and making that youth sort of area feel confident to be in the team sport will then help them also feel more confident in how they can address the challenges of coming out and being themselves, if they know they've got a supportive network around them. But the language piece is important, because if they hear that language, it's going to drive them away straight away.
Yeah, off the back of that, Sue, I've got a slightly interesting, challenging question for you. But I was just thinking from what we've talked about so far, the elements that are very value-based and wanting to make sure that the right atmospheres are created and environments for people. And rugby, I think, has moments of having an identity crisis in terms of believing it has these high values, but the reality is that people aren't necessarily doing that, or teams at the highest level in an elite environment are trying to actually get whatever competitive advantage they can. So while we're all shaking hands at the end, it's not all fair, or I don't know. There's the front of what rugby's values are, but I think more and more people are exposing elements of the game across the board that perhaps these values aren't shown throughout. And I wonder whether while our question is about how rugby can improve its support of the LGBT community, whether there's actually a reverse part of that question, which is how much can rugby learn from the values that the LGBTQ plus community hold dear?
Yeah, I mean, totally. I was writing myself a little list before this, but to answer the question, what can rugby do? And part of the answer is listen and learn, right? There's loads of good stuff that goes on. Don't get me wrong. We are why we're here, because we love our sport and think it's the most amazing place to be. There are also as you say, loads of challenges and loads of work still to do. So we have to really listen to the community and understand what we can do differently. We have to get more representation in places where decisions are actually made, where courses are written, where education's done, and we've just got to take lessons from what's worked elsewhere. We have to be really, really important that when there is, you referenced it earlier, when there is any kind of issues with language, when there's any kind of homophobic abuse, whatever it may be, that it is called out and that action is taken, because you've got to set an example. You've got to show people that it's not right, and we have to get those role models out there. So sort of show the world how inclusive the sport can be. But yeah, I mean, it comes back to what's worked elsewhere. What can we as a sport learn from the LGBTQ plus community? What can we put into practice, and how do we make it better?
Yeah, and Jade, from a women's game perspective, I mean, how much do you think the game can learn as the women's game gets to a I don't know, it's not at an even platform yet and a long way from it, but while it's on the rise?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Like, I think everybody needs to be empathetic in a way that those who are allies of the community will never really understand what it feels like, just like I'll never understand what it feels like for people in the same community. Everybody's experience is very different, and I think that's really important to remember, that somebody might find something offensive, somebody might not, but it's catering for everyone, and it's making sure that no matter how you might not be bothered by that, it's really important to call that out regardless, because everyone experiences it differently. And I think that's one of the most important things, is to stay on top of that. So within the women's game, you want to keep growing that. And again, you need to call out everything that might not necessarily be there, whether that's, just talking about the women's game, or then referring to something else, or referring to the bigger picture. So I think from the women's perspective, it's not being afraid to call out what you might not agree with, or you think that somebody else would be bothered by, and it's just having each other's back, really. And I think there is still a long way to go. I'd say that we're definitely on the right path to being more inclusive and having that more open environment, but as with everything, there's still lots of steps to take.
Yeah, just to say to everyone watching, by the way, there's a Q&A box, which I think which we've seen Paolo put a comment in, and then the chat. I mean, if you want to put questions through the Q&A, then we can certainly look at answering a few of those. I can see Paolo. I'm not quite sure there's a question, but he said, "Hi everyone. I recently came out to my captain. He was great. He told me as long as I keep scoring." I'm guessing that means on the field rather than off it. Then Buki says, "Why do you think there is such a difference between the amount of out men and women at the elite level of the sport, and what is a driver of this?" Does anybody want to put their hand up for that? Yeah, go on, Devin.
I would love to touch on that. I think that there's like a tremendous contradiction between the men's and the women's side of the game. It seems like as a female player, every single one of them at some point in their career knows a player they played with who was openly gay or identified as LGBTQ plus. For me, as somebody who came up playing Division I and also having a chance to play professionally, I've never met another person playing that level who was openly gay. So I think that alone shows that there's a big difference. And part of that comes from what is valued. Like I said, from the men's side of the game, it's viewed that if you're gay, you're weaker, or that you're effeminate, and that those values are not valued by the rugby community as contributing towards you being a good player. So there's this big shame from gay players who are trying to make their way in the sport and trying to make their way at the highest level, who don't feel like that is an aspect of them that would be valued by the community. And they don't, as Jade and Sue have said, they don't see that representation. And when you don't see that representation, there's an additional responsibility that comes with it, in the sense that if you are a high level player who comes forward, now you're going to be taking on additional media attention. You're going to be expected to speak up for a community. And, I'm sure that a lot of us can relate as athletes. What we want to do is focus on our sport first and foremost. So I think for a lot of male athletes, it's extremely intimidating, the idea of taking all that on while also trying to pursue training at the highest level possible.
And I think part of this has also got to be about education, hasn't it? Because it's about creating environments where LGBTQ plus athletes can feel comfortable. I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with the director of rugby in the Premiership last year. And I said, do you feel that you have the right atmosphere in your coaching group, within your team, to cope with an academy player, 17, 18, 19 years of age, who was wanting to come out? And he said, oh, well, you know, me and my wife have got gay friends. We feel like we've got a very comfortable and open door policy at the club. I feel I'd be very approachable. And paused for about 2 seconds and then said, but to be honest, you've probably highlighted a weakness in my coaching in that I don't know that I'm necessarily giving off the right signals or doing the right thing. So I'd be interested in working on that. And I thought that's quite interesting in terms of actually what, rather than, it reminds me of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of, we can all say, well, I'm not racist. Yes, but what are you actively doing to improve the situation or to change things? And so while you can be open door policy and, you know, I would hope an LGBTQ plus athlete would feel comfortable or okay, what active steps could you be doing to educate your squad, your coaching staff, the people around you, to actually give those people the opportunity to say what they want and be who they are? I think Sue had a hand up first of all.
Yeah, all of those things I 100% endorse at elite level, and the issue is way before elite level. So we lose so many kids, particularly boys, from sport because they already don't feel like they fit in from, you know, almost the first PE lesson they go to, or the first thing they see on the telly that shows them they've got to be these big, butch, masculine, straight, all of that. Just the signals that they get from the very first time they think about stepping on a sports pitch. And so that's why we have to work so hard on inclusivity right at the grassroots. So that coach that you're just talking about, not just the league, but that coach, you know, on the community rugby pitch on a Sunday morning, all of it, that it feels like such a welcoming place to be for those kids. It's got to start there.
Matt?
Yes, because I again completely agree. I mean, we know they're out there. We have 60 people, 60 guys show up every year for our Pathway to Rugby program who've self-excluded from sport or not had the opportunity to play rugby, and are there keen and eager to want to play and learn. So we train them and progress them through, and you know, we have players that go all the way from the pathway up to the first 15 and are playing great rugby, having no history of it. So I think it's really, really important. So I think a big question around the sport is you know, we've always been, you know, oh, well, rugby is very open and inclusive. I think the word I use more sometimes is tolerance, and you see that a lot on sort of social media, which you don't want to talk about social media too much, but you know, some of the comments even about the announcements the Harlequins have made this week, you know, oh, we don't care what they do as long as they play rugby, you know, I don't care what they do at home. You know, I think we need to stop just being tolerant and actually turn to celebrating the diversity and celebrating the differences, so that, you know, everybody who joins the sport, the kids, you know, who are there, see it. So community clubs doing pride games to sort of celebrate that diversity, and other, you know, days and events and games to sort of celebrate their local community, so that, you know, they're being totally inclusive. You know, how, you know, get down to sort of, you know, talking about everybody being welcome and actually make some positive steps to celebrate those differences, as opposed to just saying, well, we don't care what you do behind closed doors, you know, we just come here to play rugby on a Saturday. And I think that's a real change that's needed.
Yeah, Devin, I'll come to you in one sec. I just wanted to, off the back of that, Matt, I mean, it makes me think that there are a lot of stories that are out there about the journeys that many of us as LGBTQ plus people have had, and some of us have had fairly uneventful, very happy coming out processes. Other people haven't. And I was called last night by someone who hosts a very well-known rugby podcast, and there was a question about the Harlequins supporters group, and you know, why do they need this? Is this highlighting the fact that the other group is the other part of the club group is homophobic? It was like, yes, very good. I see how you're trying to goad me into this conversation, but I actually felt like I was having to go back and explain why LGBTQ plus people have the moments of reckoning that we do, why we have moments of fear and anxiety, and why people struggle. And that while there's tolerance and acceptance in many areas, and there's been a lot of progress, why there's still so much work to do. And you've only got to look at, you know, ghettos in Poland and various things to see that in 2020 and 2021. And I wonder whether part of the education piece somehow has to be still in 2021, I don't know, for example, telling a group of people or showing a club that's got this group, by the way, the reason we're doing this is, I agree with you, we're going to celebrate it, but actually here's a story about this guy's experience, and it's not pretty, and you're not going to like it, but it might help you realize why this initiative is worthwhile. And I wonder at times whether, while we're very good at the rainbows and the celebration, whether unfortunately a few of the harder stories or experiences people have had might be needed to be seen a bit more, so people understand why this is important. Anyway, that's just my opinion on it, and I turn myself into a panelist momentarily. Devin.
Yeah, no, and just to speak on that as well about, having visibility for those stories, I think one of the biggest issues in men's rugby in regards to players feeling comfortable opening up is there's not a big culture of vulnerability, right? I mean, as men in general, it's sort of expected that you're not to speak openly about your struggles and mental health and all these other things where you're expressing a part of yourself that you wouldn't normally share. So I think that in the men's side of the game, focusing on encouraging players to be vulnerable and fostering an environment where people feel like they can share themselves in that way extends beyond just, an LGBTQ player feeling welcome. It extends to everybody being better off by having that sort of outlet and connection with their team. So one example of ways I say that, coaches can do that, when I played in the 2017 World Maccabea Games, we as an entire group and a team sat down and went through one by one, person by person, every single day, a different person, and just had them talk about their experiences, talk about why was this tour meaningful to them? Why was rugby meaningful to them? What did it mean for them to be here? And hearing athletes and teammates of mine who don't identify as LGBTQ+, but being open about experiences with depression and losses they've experienced in their family that inspired them, it gives you this sense of connection that inspires you to be vulnerable and inspires you to want to share a part of yourself that you might not want to share otherwise. So I think that it's important to note that piece that in general, men are told not to share those details about themselves. And I think just by improving that piece, it would have a massive effect on LGBTQ athletes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. To bring a couple of points in that we're getting from those of you who are watching, and we're grateful for all of you being here this evening. Nicole, referring to your earlier point, Matt, the "we don't care what you do" narrative seems a little like the "we don't see color" narrative, which I think we touched on. When you minimize the identity, like it doesn't matter or shouldn't matter, you ignore an important aspect of the person's identity, which I can see a few nodding heads over. Lindsay Webb, our future England team will come from our grassroots youth clubs and schools. Does the RFU have a strategy to ensure they grow the game and promote inclusion in these environments? I'll leave you to mull that one over for a minute, Sue.
I was going to say I better take that one. No.
Yeah, we'll go on while we're there.
Yeah, so yeah, I won't take too long because there's a very detailed sort of plan and strategy bit. But yes, so we have been rewriting our strategy sort of the last couple of years, and one of the key strands of that strategy is diversity inclusion. And that strategy is divided into several parts, and one part of that is the grassroots game. And I can see Matt nodding his head. Matt's one of the people who is, I talked earlier about the importance of listening and the importance of involving people who really know. And Matt, is very kindly giving a lot of his free time to think through how we make that difference in the space of game leadership. There's similar pieces of work going on in gameplay and in the community game. So I won't go into all the detail, but yes, absolutely, it's critical, right? We want rugby. We want as many people in this country to benefit from our amazing game. We have all got so much out of it, haven't we? We're all nodding away. It's brought me the most amazing experiences and lessons of my adult life, and we, as a sport, want as many kids to have that as possible. So it's critical.
Yeah, very good. And even Sue, you and I were visibly a part of the diversity role models last year. So that was part of, I think, some of the start of that work. Just to go to some that have come through the Q&A box. Rami, a slightly longer one, but I'll get through it. I think we've sort of covered some of this actually, but Rami says the positive support and the increased visibility seems to be generating harsher opposition and sincere hatred. I'm assuming, increased visibility of LGBTQ people. Our psychological well-being has somehow engendered polarizing climates and deranged bullies who lend themselves to policies based in hate or lack of tolerance. Is it it time to address the bullying through an informed trauma approach, for instance, or any means of opening dialogue with the understanding that it's not our fault, but our responsibility to get through to them? I sort of think that was maybe part of what I was discussing in terms of, do we need to actually show some of the more painful stories to perhaps get through to people, Rami? I'll go through a few of the questions and then perhaps some of you can decide if you've got a view on each of them. Grant says, what would you like to see the unions implementing to improve the visibility of LGBTQ plus players outside of the inclusive clubs? That's an interesting one. Then an anonymous attendee, particularly in relation to the women's game, I'm noticing an increase in marketing that clubs are wanting to emphasize that you can be straight, feminine and girly and be a female rugby player. How does this marry with wanting to also create an inclusive environment for LGBT plus people and not give the impression that some stereotypes around the women's game are negative? Yeah, there's a few layers in that one. Jade, I think I might come to you to have a little word on that. Let's just check these. I'm conscious that we've got about 15-20 minutes left. Then Mindset Sport, what support needs to be put in place at the regional grassroots level to ensure we have a fully diverse and inclusive club, and what barriers need to be removed to ensure this happens? So Matt, you may have a view on that. So let's, before we just get onto those, we've obviously got a few that are waiting beyond that. Perhaps let's go back to Grant's question about unions implementing to improve the visibility of LGBTQ plus players outside of inclusive clubs. Devin, you're nodding away at that.
Yeah, well, I think that we've talked a lot about what to do on the grassroots level and what to do on the local level in terms of promoting vulnerability and addressing homophobic language being used in the club space. I think that we've talked a lot about the progress of LGBTQ inclusion in sport, but I think it's also important to know that it's not all been linear and we're not all just moving in one direction. So when I think about policies to improve visibility, it's hard for me not to think about the recent World Rugby ban on trans athletes participating in international competition. I feel like that's a policy that is very opposite to what we're talking about, right? It's actually excluding LGBTQ athletes and not giving them an opportunity to be visible in that way. So I think that that's an easy policy in the sense that it's very obvious that that doesn't promote this goal that we're looking at. And it does affect the grassroots level as well, because as we all noted, we've gotten this incredible gift from rugby. We've gotten all these amazing experiences, but having this policy in place now is forcing a very large part of the LGBTQ community, which is the trans community, to really question their place in the sport and really question, is this a sport where I am welcome? And has this invalidated the work that I put into my career so far? Because I think that rugby was one of the few spaces where trans athletes felt included. And now that's been flipped on its head, and they're now really being forced to question if there is a place for them in this game at all. So I think that policy is extremely important to improve visibility.
Yeah, and it's an area that I know there's a lot of heat in that debate, and a lot of people have views on either side. The RFU opted to take their stance away from where World Rugby were going, which, as someone who has worked in and around the RFU, I certainly was pleased to see. I'm not going to ask Sue to comment on it because I don't think it's probably the forum to do so, to have one person talk about a whole policy. But yeah, I think some very important points made there, Devin. To continue our work as a panel and get through a few of the questions, Jade, the talk about clubs emphasising you can be straight, feminine and girly and be a female rugby player, as well as perhaps other visuals that we see of women's rugby players. I mean, there's two sides to this, isn't there? Of course you can be anything you want to be, but as long as you're competitive and can do the job on the field, that's all that really matters, right?
Yeah, I think wording needs to be really careful around different campaigns. I think it's important to see the game as a whole. And I know, like in the question, it was saying some stereotypes of the game are negative. And I wouldn't say they're necessarily negative, because some people are like that. It's just, it's different. And I think rather than having, you could be this, you could be that, you could be this, it just needs to be like, this is a game for everyone, no matter what. So whilst to some people those stereotypes are negative, to other people that's actually who they are. And I think it's important to see the whole picture there on, yes, some people might be butch, some people are lesbian, some people are straight, some people are more feminine. But I think rather than putting labels on it, we need to just keep pushing the inclusive, the atmosphere of it, rather than necessarily having labels of this, that, and the next thing. And I think wording is very careful around that, and I think that's what everybody needs to keep pushing, is just using the right language that's there for everybody, rather than specifically what you can or can't be.
Yeah, Sue, I know, wants to come in on that. Also, just Eric Dennison, who is watching on, who's at Monash University and has been part of producing some great studies. He says, thank you, Sue, for raising the issue of boys, regardless of sexuality, leaving rugby because they don't like the climate and the language. We find that consistently in our research, yet sport administrators, brackets generally men, don't want to talk about it. Why is this? How do we help rugby help itself? Well, you were going to reply to Jade, first of all, but there's something...
all I was going to say about your question to Jade is it's sometimes also important to celebrate the progress we've made and how far we've come. And compared to in my day, honestly, all they used to do was dress us up in pretty dresses and put makeup on us and sort of point at us and say, "Oh, isn't this funny? Look at the rugby girls, dressed up." And it's got a lot better since then. The coverage of women's sport is usually at least about the athletes. And I just totally endorse what Jade said. We need to create role models out of everybody, out of the butch women, out of the feminine women, out of trans women, you name it. We need to show those people and tell those stories.
Yeah, very good. And Eric saying, how do we help rugby help itself?
Well, I mean, I with the risk of repeating myself, it is things like representation. It's changing the people in the corridors of power, making sure the corridors of power genuinely represent all of us. And all of those things they're not quick to do. But it's, if we want our game to be open to everybody, then we need the places where decisions are made. We need the education, all of it, to be as representative as possible. How
conscious were you when you went CFO at the RFU? Sort of could do that, might fancy that actually along with that was the fact that you aren't another man in a suit, another straight man in a suit.
It was part of the attraction for me, right? I said earlier, I've got so much in my adult life from rugby. It genuinely changed my life, and to have the opportunity to be part of making our sport even better and even more exciting and even more accepting and even more open to more people. It was just an incredibly exciting opportunity for me to be part of, making our sport as inclusive and as successful as possible.
And I made a light-hearted joke at the start about it, but it was your drive that helped see the RFU turn up alongside the Steelers at Pride, wasn't it?
Well, it's a great excuse for me to go to Pride and get line out lifted in front of Nelson's column. I certainly wasn't complaining. It's great fun.
Love that. Okay, let me just nip back to the questions we've got. It's amazing how quickly you run out of time on these things. Matt, with regards to grassroots, what support needs to be put in place at that level to ensure we have a fully diverse and inclusive club, and what barriers need to be removed? So I don't know if the writer mindset sport is coming from a club perspective, wanting to know what help their club can be given to do all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One, there is going to be information and best practice and resources coming out of the RFU, and that's all great work that's going on. But actually, clubs have to take some ownership of their own destiny with this, and there's a lot they can do internally. They are a diverse club, whether they think they are or not, and so now they need to make the decision to be inclusive. They can talk to, there's 22, almost 23 or 24 clubs coming in England. So there's one nearby to every single rugby club in England in terms of an inclusive rugby club, part of IGR, that will be more than happy to share stories, come down and visit and talk to, the members of their club, the members of their board about their experiences and what it's meant for them, and that's one part of the big jigsaw puzzle. So, I touched on it earlier about celebrating the difference. So, why not host a Pride Day? Why not host a Pride game, the same as the Harlequins have done, but at the grassroots level, or a fun Summer Sevens tournament? I know Mitcham and Carshalton RFU in South London are doing one in May, hopefully, fingers crossed. It doesn't have to be the IGR clubs that sort of lead the charge on inclusivity. Let's see some of the other grassroots clubs say, yep, absolutely, we recognize that we may well have a 13, 14, 15-year-old or a 30-year-old who is, LGBTQ. They may not be comfortable coming out, so let's make it an environment where they're comfortable. So, reach out to any of the IGR clubs in your local area, talk to us, but also, watch out and wait for the stuff that's going to come through CBs and through the sort of the RFU structures, because it's all good work that is happening.
Yeah, and I think it's important. A brilliant point that you said, I thought, about they will be diverse already. And actually some of the work that I've been doing with England Touch on diversity and inclusion is actually about understanding that diversity isn't about sexuality or gender necessarily. It can be, you can feel excluded due to diversity, not only through the headline areas of diversity, for example, like skin color and you know, gender and sexuality, but it could be the geography of where you're from. It could be the wealth that you have and the fact that you can't afford to go to training sessions that you've got to pay £7 a week for at your club. Or it could be that, yeah, there's
I don't drink alcohol and I'm not going to down that pint after I've scored a try. You know, there are, you know, there's lots of little, you know, microaggressions, micro areas where you have to consider, you know, just being welcome. Now, nobody wants to take away the culture and fun of the game, but at the same point, you have to be conscious of, you know, not everybody is going to be part of that sort of same sphere as you. So make sure people feel comfortable in that.
Yeah, great. Sophie asked, what can rugby do to be more trans inclusive? Now, I mentioned at the start that we don't have trans representation among our panel, and it is something that we're hoping to certainly improve on and get some more representation. And maybe we're hoping it's going to be around the Pride match in June, but certainly inviting anybody to comment as to what could be the sorts of things that may be beneficial. Devin?
I already touched on the World Rugby trans ban, so I think that is still a massive portion of it. I mean, it's going to be very hard to get trans representation if they feel like they're not welcome in the sport and they know that they don't have an opportunity to play at the highest level of the sport. Another area that I don't think is talked about is if you're a trans man who wants to play on a men's team, you actually have to sign a waiver essentially saying that you're not entitled to coverage if you were to have a severe injury. So that's another aspect where I feel like people feel like it's equal because trans men are allowed to participate, but they're not touching on the aspect that in order to do so, they're being asked to do something that other players are not. So I think that there's still a lot of these issues that need to be discussed because as of now, there's still a lot of contradictions between what is expected of a cisgender athlete and somebody who identifies as trans or non-binary.
Lovely, thank you for that. I can just see it may be Lord Robert Hayward who's commenting. One area of exclusion you haven't touched on is disability. Yes, quite right. I think it's worth noting at this stage that there are going to be future webinars over the course of the next few months where we are actually going to be touching on other areas of this sort of thing. So there is a mental health webinar that we're going to be hosting towards the end of March. Then we're going to be looking at race and the issues around that towards the end of April. And then towards the end of May, there will be another webinar which will be covering disability. So anything from physical disability in terms of, you know, movement and activity down to perhaps people who are hearing impaired, any levels of disability. So those will be covered in future webinars. Obviously, our focus today is more on the LGBTQ plus side, but I think it's been interesting actually where some of that has spilled over into some of those other areas. Just having another look at a few of the questions. Do you feel having new and existing players, members and staff sign a code of conduct policy can improve accountability at grassroots level? And do the RFU already have support for community clubs to do so? Anyone?
I mean, I'd say most clubs do have a code of conduct. What's included in that is, you know, down to therefore the club, and then there's recommendations that come through, I think, from your county boards and the RFU. But I think, you know, we, the Steelers, have set up this year a diversity inclusion group. You'd think, well, why does the Steelers need that? Well, actually, we've had to address, you know, and think about other aspects of our diversity and inclusion and how we can be more welcoming and open to everybody. So I think everybody should be looking at their sort of club and saying, okay, well, let's, you know, start these conversations and tell the stories and have the difficult conversations. They're not all easy, you know, as we've said, you know, you have to be prepared to have some difficult conversations, re-educate some people, or educate some people in the first place, and sort of open up the forum to see what will happen. Something we did, and I think, you know, I'd encourage all clubs to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. A question from Paolo. Hi, Devin. Do you feel you can fully focus 100% on your training and your game now? And then also, will you help more players feeling comfortable about their sexuality?
I definitely feel like I can focus on my game. I don't know if it's more than before because I'm now also trying to focus on being outspoken and being an advocate and trying to be as visible as possible. I think that it's very important to be seen in this kind of a space. And part of the reason that I felt the need to kind of come forward and, I kind of labeled myself that gay rugger. And a lot of the reason behind that was because I felt before coming out that was a big fear that I had, that I would be labeled as that gay rugby player. I wouldn't be known as a talented rugby player or a professional player. I would just be known as the gay rugby player. So I think that having people come forward and put their hands up and say, yes, I'm openly gay and I'm proud of that, but it is not my entire identity, is going to make it easier down the road for other people to feel like they can come forward and not be pigeonholed by that one detail about themselves.
Very good. Just to, I don't mean to sound abrupt when people are finishing speaking. I'm just conscious that what you've said is a lovely contribution, and we'll get a couple more while we can, thanks to people who are putting their questions through. Genevieve Glover, who I know is also doing some work on the D&I work with the RFU, says, what would you say to someone who would like to lead and be part of the change and are hesitating to take that step in applying for that role that could make a difference? Go for it is clearly my response. I mean,
yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I'd say too. I mean, look at the game has given you, whoever this person is, the game has given you so much. You've got so much out of it. If you can make a difference and make it a better, more inclusive, more exciting place for someone else, then do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I also find, having in the last year or two got involved in either LGBTQ working groups or pushing my own initiative, that actually it becomes a huge education piece as soon as you start to become involved in it. And then when you do, you realize quite quickly where there is work to be done, where lessons can be learned. But actually stepping into it and becoming involved and becoming educated and learning about it as you go is already incredibly rewarding. And in a way, in doing so, there are no wrong answers, because you're already making a change for the better if you're already becoming aware of more of the issues. Because then if someone comes up to you and wants to talk about something, you instantly find that you're already more educated to answer them. If
only we could ask the audience, I'd send that question straight back to Genevieve, because she has put so much time and effort into making working with leading the group that Matt's part of to try to lead the change in rugby.
Yeah, excellent. And I think we'll round off in a moment. But and another question here, question from Tom. Sometimes I wonder if the pressure that can come with being an LGBTQ plus role model is stopping players coming out until they retire. What sort of support could be offered to players by clubs and sports associations to guide them in being a role model? And we've seen that kind of stuff, haven't we, with some players that have come out afterwards. And ultimately, there is no responsibility for any player that has come out to do all the interviews, to be on the front pages of the magazines or whatever, but there's going to be that interest, which Devin seems to have expertly courted over the last few weeks, but I dare say has been no doubt a welcome distraction in most areas, Devin, because the coverage seems to have been so positive. But it is a distraction. If you were focused on playing in a World Cup final this weekend, your last few weeks might not have been the ideal preparation.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as that we've said, that representation piece is so massive, because if there was widespread representation of openly gay male rugby players, then I wouldn't have to worry about that extra coverage, right? I mean, nobody's going to care if you've got a team of, 20 players who are openly gay, or even just having a league that has 20 to 30 players. I mean, it's a big deal if I came out, but would people still really think it was a big deal if 20 other players came out in the next week in the same league? I think the media would kind of lose interest, right? So I think that's where that representation piece is so important, because as that representation grows, the responsibility felt by that person who comes forward is going to be less and less over time. And if they want to get involved, great, but it's not going to be, like you said, this overbearing pressure that could take away from their performance and preparation.
It's sort of in a slightly tongue-in-cheek fashion. I've just had the idea of some sort of, very, very high elite, well-known international player across the world that's been waiting for their moment to come out and get all the headlines. But because it's going to be a month after you, Devin, the world just goes, really? Yeah, we're done. we just did a whole load of stories on this, thanks. I missed my chance.
I think one person wouldn't have to worry about that, but yeah, if a group of 10 of them decided to come out, I think they might not get a whole lot of attention.
Yeah, no, well, I think it's a really interesting point. Lovely to see some of the remarks that you guys are putting in the chat. Thank you to Yulia, who says, thanks for a great talk. You're all wonderful speakers. Rami, quite insightful. Thanks for the enlightening discussion and great new ideas. Nicole, thanks so much to all the panelists and the Queen's Foundation. Lovely to hear and learn from this conversation. So I think that's probably about all we have time for. So listen, it's been really lovely to hear from all of you. Yeah, just to wrap up, what are the next things on your horizon apart from working out how to stay sane and have something else for dinner and invent a new walk around your house if you're locked in? What's next for you, Devin?
What's next for me is just trying to continue to be visible and really just try to use my voice. And, I think it's an incredible opportunity to be able to impact people by just talking about my experiences. And I really want to pursue that as much as I can and get back to training and playing. I want to move over to the UK ideally and kind of be closer to my partner and try my hand over there again. So that's what's next for me. And I'm just going to try to keep, doing what I can.
Excellent. And Jade?
As much as I'm in the community, I want to keep learning about the community, and that's every aspect as well. So a bit like around the BLM movement, did a lot of research around that, but I think it's really important to do that for the LGBT plus community as well. So I'm definitely going to put a lot more time into that.
Very good. Sue?
Well, working alongside people like Matt and Genevieve, who put the question, we've been writing a D&I plan, and so the next step for me and us is to do it, put it into practice.
Excellent. I've got so far in terms of answering our question, and I know I sort of started with you, Matt, at the beginning. So how can rugby improve its support of the LGBTQ plus community, and why does it matter? Well, I think we covered why it matters and the benefits that there are for people who are LGBTQ plus and those who are not. And I've got some bullet points here. More visibility, work on language and that visibility perhaps coming through more role models, continued greater inclusion, promoting vulnerability, which I think there may not be enough of that happening. Any other bullet points that you think we've I mean, obviously we've sorted it, we've done it all, we've solved LGBTQ plus inclusion in rugby, of course, because we're fabulous. But I jest, any other key points that you think that I've not got down?
Watch Disclosure on Netflix.
Watch Disclosure on Netflix. Good. I like it. Any more?
Get out and support your local clubs, your IGR clubs and your inclusive clubs and women's clubs. When we can get back to rugby, we've all been struggling and suffering, and clubs will need support after this. So get out there and support those clubs, especially the ones that are making good inroads in inclusivity, because they'll need it.
Yes, indeed. Well, and mentioning the King's Cross Steelers, I should say that there is an evening with Eamon Ashton-Atkinson, Drew McDonnell and Nick Evans on Sunday, February the 28th. So for all of you who have joined us on this webinar, there is another great evening in prospect. It's £5 a ticket. It marks the end of LGBT History Month, and the Harlequins Foundation are delighted to invite you to attend an evening with these fine gentlemen. It is, of course, about the documentary that has been done for the King's Cross Steelers, and Eamon, the film's director, Drew, one of the documentary's central characters, and their former director of rugby, Nick Evans, will discuss their own respective journeys, the role rugby's played in their lives, and why the world needs to hear this story.
Slight correction, Nick being our female head director of rugby at the time, but just a very quick thing on the film. It's a great story. It's Glasgow Film Festival. It's tickets available for it. And I think the RFU have been incredibly supportive of it, and we're very grateful for that. And it's a must-see by the Sunday Times, so grab a ticket if you can.
It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Personal endorsement from Sue. Everybody, thank you very much. Devin, thank you for taking the time out your afternoon. Jade, I hope isolation continues to serve you well, and good luck to you in Scotland when the Women's Six Nations rolls around. Matt, Sue, continue the fabulous work you're doing on the D&I side, and in what we know is challenging circumstances for everybody within the game. And to everybody that's been watching, it's been great to get your questions and your views across. Join us for the rest of the webinar series as it continues over the next few months. I'm off to go and have my dinner. I'm going to get takeout. What about you? Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.